Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to yet another installment of Positive Recovery MD podcast. We are in sort of another quarantine type of thing, but our guest decided to come in and brave it. Thank God we are all COVID negative.
Yes.
Got the co-host, Julie DeNova.
Hey there.
And I'm really excited to introduce this new guest because if I was Noah and I had an ark and I only had like 40 people to save, he definitely would be one of them. And I was tempted to call him as, you know, the positive intervention of the day, but I figured I'm going to see him and he knows how much I care about him. And I think one of the best like dinner dates I've ever had in groups was like the first time Don and I really got to know each other's stories. I've never laughed so hard in my life. And he tickles me. So let me introduce Donald Chang.
Yep. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. And so a little background. I'm going to blow your anonymity. This is an addiction talk.
Yep.
So I'm going to ask you to tell your story. I'm going to ask you to tell a little bit of background, something I may have heard when you spoke that night for EO, and then kind of what you're doing now in the church, because I think you use the word shepherd when you describe it to me, and I kind of love that. I'm going to tease our listeners for the end because I really think sometimes going back to basics as what you're doing is great. It kind of like the pace of life now in the quarantine, at least for me and people I've talked to, has focused attention on what is actually really important and what is actually really necessary as a lot of the noise strips away. And back in time before there was all this technology and all these distractions, we did things a lot like what we're doing now to some degree. So why don't you start by letting the listeners know like where you're from, how many brothers, sisters, family, kind of what it was like growing up and into the addiction and into the recovery piece.
Right. Wow. Where do we go? So if we go back to the beginning, I immigrated to the United States at the age of 3. And
how did your parents think about that?
You know what? I think they were totally excited. You know, it was kind of a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. So my mom came from a very affluent background family, and my dad came from the not so affluent background family. And so they got married despite the families not approving. And my dad did not see an opportunity for upward mobility while he was in South Korea. And so his idea was to follow and delve into the American dream. And so they picked up, they brought me here at the age of 3, landed in Baltimore. Both my parents had economic degrees from Korea, but without the language, they just need to start from scratch. And so my dad immediately picked up offshore welding as a trade, and we moved down south. And when I say down south, I mean like the armpit of the United States.
Louisiana?
Macomb, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I mean, we were in all 3 states because obviously he worked in the Gulf 6 months at a time.
So this is an economist from arguably a country that has the best education system in the world.
Yeah.
And he has to be a welder.
Yep.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Dangerous, well-paying. He saved up his funds and he opened up his first, back then it was called Gulf instead of Chevron. So he purchased his first Gulf gas station at OST in Alameda, if you know where that is.
Yes.
That's a
Old Spanish Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in the day, that wasn't.
It was a little rough back then. Just a little. Full service, self-service. You know, he had a garage bay. He drove a Ford F-150. desert duelers, rifle rack in the back. He's actually one of the first minorities, I think, that stepped into ghillies. You remember ghillies?
Absolutely. It was in Urban Cowboy.
Yeah. So him and his crew offshore would go drinking on the weekends.
I'm sure all of this really thrilled your mother's family, right? It's like he may have married down, but this guy's going to America to make something of himself, and he's a welder, and he's going to ghillies and has a gun rack.
Yeah. So
the pride of the family.
So my dad is not your stereotypical Korean biologically, in the sense that he's actually like 6'3", which is like an anomaly.
That's why you're so tall.
Yeah. Because, Koreans are taller now because they've picked up a Western diet over the past, couple decades now.
And they stole a lot of our tall women.
Yes. I've heard that. I don't know if it was true or not.
It's absolutely not true.
I should have worn flats today.
So, yeah, I grew up in some rough neighborhoods. I ended up, I think in grade school, I got jumped. And I got jumped for being different. It was a neighborhood that did not have many Asians. As far as I knew, I was like the only Asian I knew of until like middle school. And so after getting hit upside the head with a 40 bottle, my parents were like, okay, time for us to move out of Pasadena and just kind of find a neighborhood within Pasadena that's going to work for us. And so we moved into the Sagemont area. And that was, that's kind of where I just grew up in your middle-class neighborhood, rode bikes, played football, killed a man with the ball in somebody's front lawn, Defender. Remember all those games, right?
Absolutely.
So
Galaga, Defender.
70s, 80s, good stuff.
Right.
Good, wholesome stuff. Atari 2600. The king of video game systems. Pretty well. And then they decided to send me to private school, East Haven Baptist, in middle school. And it's at that school that I actually ran into like the first other Asian person. And I was like, oh, there's like other people like me. And it was just odd. And so you have to understand that coming from the age of 3, coming from South Korea, as far as an identity, I relate well to African Americans, to Latino Americans. And then, we move into this, middle class, very white Caucasian neighborhood. I end up going to private school. And then I told my parents for high school, I wanted to go to a public school because I had realized by that time that I wanted more diversity, in my life. And that was, for me, more important than the quality of education. And of course, my parents, being first generation Asian parents, just looked at me like I was insane. Basically just said, you know what, you'll go where we send you. So ended up going to Ailey Felsick when they first opened up. I think it was like 3 years after they opened up. And so that's where I just, it was a pretty big class of people, ran into just the whole world. My eyes got open to the whole world. People from, very diverse backgrounds. And that's where I kind of just found my first taste for alcohol, is that growing up in a fairly conservative Asian household in the South, and then you go and then you realize that there's this whole world out there. I just wanted to live life to the fullest. And by then, my parents had become very successful. My dad had 3 or 4 gas stations by that time. And we lived very comfortably and very well. And I was immature enough to believe that my parents' success was my success. And I took full advantage of it. And I told my parents, and I put them under great duress. And I was like, well, Dad, I'm in high school now. And my first car has to be new. Because if you give me a used car, this is going to be tough.
Someone's going to hit me upside the head with a bottle if you do that.
Surely.
Did it work?
Yes.
Awesome.
What was your first car?
My first car was a Nissan 300ZX with T-top.
Shut up. Brand new.
Brand new.
The guy drives was he still driving a F-150?
F-150. He's a Ford man forever. Recently he went to Dodge, but he's been a Ford man for a long time.
Oh my God. That was the hottest car. I can't imagine that would be my first car. Man. Anyway, so you're cruising along and you're 300.
Yeah.
You like alcohol.
And it worked great. Alcohol, booze, and eventually, girls, parties, all that stuff. And I think for me, it was just a coping mechanism, not really finding an identity even through high school. And I think kids still go through that. And for me, it was just easier to put up a wall and put up a facade of a projection of how I want to be viewed by people instead of just me being myself. And so the projection is I'm successful, even though I'm in high school. I have access to these things and I can pretty much do whatever I want. And so there's a huge entitlement factor growing up that way.
Crazy Rich Asian.
Yeah, Crazy Rich Asian guy. Yeah, it was way before the book or the movie or whatever it is. But yeah, it was amazing how shallow my relationships were. Obviously, when you put up a wall and you keep people at bay and you just want them to see a facade, I mean, you're not going to have deep, meaningful relationships. Then I went to college and then my drinking extended. I went to UT like provisionary. In that summer, I think I went to class maybe 5 times and I was supposed to be a full-time student. And out of those 5 times, I went in my boxers all 5 times. So
we were in summer school at the same time. I didn't have to be provisional, but I wanted to get ahead. And I think I remember this tall Asian guy wearing underwear to class. That was you.
You know, I knew it would come back to haunt me one day. I ended up dropping out. School was not for me. I was just busy drinking, having a good time. My dad, I think my 3rd year in 1991, my dad had throat cancer. And he was like, and I'm the oldest of 3. So within the Asian family model, the oldest has a little bit more responsibility. So, I had hid from my parents that, I was basically just dropped out and partying for 3 years. And it was a good way for me to just come back down, without anyone knowing.
Wait, they didn't know you dropped out?
No.
How are you producing report cards?
I don't think I ever showed them.
That's only your parents that asked.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They might have asked.
An Asian parent not asking for a transcript?
Yeah.
That's
I don't know.
odd.
It
Okay.
kind of worked out well.
All right.
It really did for me.
Well, you are the king of obfuscation,
Yes.
especially with the golf clothes story I want to get to later. But that's later in your story of use. So, okay, so you're drinking.
The lies.
Were you starting to do drugs at this point?
No.
Okay, so just alcohol.
Just alcohol. So I just thought in my mind that I'm just your normal college student.
Who's not a student.
Right? Who just like to party, and I never got into any accidents, never got a DUI. I thought I was good. So I came back down to Houston, and I was supposed to finish out at U of H, and my dad was sick, so I picked up a job. And so funny enough, I ended up being like this door person at a place called the Sing Along Club.
And you did not sing at my karaoke birthday.
No.
Funny enough.
You wonder why. So, and the guy who owned the club happened to own like all the Miyako Japanese restaurants.
That's where the cooking starts, right? Yeah. Okay.
And the guy was like, you seem to be, really well liked by our patrons. I think you have a great personality to be a sushi chef. And I asked him, I was like, is that all it requires to be a sushi chef? I'm like, oh my, this is going to be easy, right? And so I started, I met the executive chef at the time, and he was this old Japanese guy. His name is Shoichi Aikida. He had come to the United States to study, graduated from Temple University, but he went with this trade that he was familiar with. And so back when Tokyo Gardens was still open over there at 610,
right,
like Westheimer, yeah. When they closed down, Shoei-san moved over to Miyako's, and then I met him. And so it's one of those situations where if a Japanese chef doesn't want to train you, he doesn't have to. And so you kind of go through this interview process. And then he asked me, he goes, do you drink? I'm like, yes, I drink well. And he goes, but do you drink scotch? I was like, no, I drink Crown. And he goes, no, single malt scotch. If you're going to be a good sushi chef, you have to learn how to drink single malt scotch. That was his choice of drink.
And be well liked. So the list of requirements are growing.
Yeah, I knew there was more eventually. And so he was like, okay, all right then, why don't you come down and have a drink with me? And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is like the easiest interview I've ever gone through.
I know. Think about how many HR laws are broken during this time.
Should I omit names at this
No.
point? Is there going to be a legal issue here? And so he poured me a glass of scotch. I drank it, and I'm like, oh, this is the drink. How could I have not consumed this in my lifetime, right? And so he taught me how to drink. And he himself was an alcoholic, as I found out later. I worked with him 17 years, and he moved back to Japan 5 years ago, and he passed away of cirrhosis. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I was obviously in recovery. The many times that I tried to reach out to him, he wasn't going to have it. He just like, that's great that you have found what you have found, but I can control my drinking and I'm fine. So obviously it saddened me that number one, he retired because he worked with me at my restaurant for 17 years and then he passed away. But going back to the beginning, he started teaching me how to drink, teaching me how to make sushi. I stunk to high heaven of fish. I smelled like a seafood market like every night, right? Because the hours are long. And so the owner thought that I had potential. My mentor thought I had potential.
And he bought you some deodorant.
Yeah, it would not help. There's nothing that can help the odor of fish for 14 hours a day, right? And so I started working. And then at the very next year, I became the general manager of Miyako's over there on Westheimer. So I'm 22 years old. I'm the general manager of a restaurant. I'm kind of a rising star kind of guy. And I'm working long hours, 6 months straight, 7 days a week at a time. And so when you're working 100 hours a week, you get tired. And I think the people around me saw that I was tired. And oddly enough, first time I tried drugs, it was because a guy who was delivering fish introduced me to it. So it was one of our fish suppliers. He looked at me. He was like, "Man, you look tired." It's like, "You're here all the time. Every time I'm here, you're here." Yeah. Because, "Man, I have something that can help you through this." And he was like, "This thing will keep you awake and you can work as long as you want." And I don't know if you remember back in, there was that commercial.
In the elevator.
You get it, right? Yeah, you work hard.
So I get more money
to buy drugs so you can work hard. I was like the poster child for that. And the first time I tried it, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I can work forever." And that went well for about 6 months. And then it was just those eyes, just everything about my face was just like falling apart. And then the same guy drops off fish. He's like, "Man, you look horrible." Guy's a work of art. And I'm like, "Yeah, it's, hey man, this stuff is like, man, it's just tearing my face apart. My nose hurts, my eyes hurt, everything hurts." Right. And he was showing me different ways to cut it and do it and, interval. And I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm about done with this." He goes, "I have something that will not cause you pain like that. And it'll be just as good." And I didn't know what it was. So he asked me to go back to his truck with him.
Speed.
Yeah. No, crack.
Oh.
Crack cocaine, right? It was like The Rock. He opened up the door and he gave me a tube. And he goes, "Hey, yeah, just suck in like this." And he just, and I didn't know what he put in there. And he just lit it up. And all I did was just inhale that smoke. And then I was thinking to myself, this is really it. It wasn't the scotch. It wasn't the cocaine. It is the crack cocaine. This is the one that's going to just really, this is going to do it for me. And eventually, after time wore by, that was it. I just got lost on it. And it took me down.
So you're what, 22?
I was
23?
23 at that time. And so I stepped away at the end from the industry at about 25. So I went for about 2 years of just smoking that rock.
And just managing the one Miyako?
Exactly. Towards the end, I couldn't even really honestly say I managed it. It just kind of ran on its own.
Right.
I just kind of hung out in the office and smoked crack all day. I walked away from that, and then I somehow managed to not do it for a year. And then I wanted to start my first restaurant. So I told my parents, I said, "Hey, took this time off. I'm good." And that's when I opened up Nara Japanese restaurant over there at Westheimer and Willcrest. I was 26 at the time, really young. My parents backed me on it. They gave me $250,000 and said, "Hey, okay, follow your dream." Now, this is after they just hated the fact that I was becoming a chef, right? Because I dropped out of school, never went back to school. I apprenticed with a Japanese chef. And for years, all I did was work.
I thought there was some cooks or something in your family.
No.
There wasn't a secret recipe that somebody shared with you? Oh my God. Okay.
There's not a 1,000-euro recipe that was passed down. I was like the first guy. I was supposed to study law, right? Yeah. Funny how that turned out. And my parents they didn't speak to me for a full year and actually I left that out. So when I decided to apprentice as a sushi chef, my parents didn't talk to me for that first year because they were under the assumption that I was going to go back to school, finish up, and eventually follow up in law school. So when they heard that I was going to become a sushi chef, they're just like, "We don't know you." And they just cut me off. By the second year, when they saw that I had some skill and talent in doing it, they were kind of okay with it, but not really. It's just like, "Okay, this is what he chose to do.
Right.
Let's just support him." And so by the time I was burned out 25, took that time off, had some really, just kind of got physically better. My head was just rolling out some really good food. And I'm like, you know what? I want to do a Japanese fusion restaurant. And they gave me a chunk of money. I went out and I started this restaurant. And in this restaurant is where, after the first 2 years, we had found some success. There's some really good chefs around town that really helped propel the restaurant up. And I mean, they're older patriarchs now, but like Robert Del Grande from Cafe Annie is when I got to meet him. And he was very encouraging. Michael Cordua with the Churrascos.
Mm-hmm.
Michael he was just one of our staunchest supporters. And so all these chefs helped just kind of get my name up locally. I was 28 when I started just doing the drugs again. Got out of a relationship, really upset. You know what? I need to go. Now, mind you, I've been drinking the whole time, but I'd stayed off the hard stuff. So anyways, so The Rock came back. And then after about 2 years of using, I almost lost my restaurant like a handful of times because I was being completely irresponsible and not present. And then after that, I went up to Austin to get away from the drugs because, you know, if you move to a different place, surely you'll get sober, right?
What happened in Nara when you moved?
So my brother took over.
That's where, okay.
Gave it to my brother, said, hey, just watch this thing for me. By then, my mentor was already there working with us. So it was kind of like
running
its own thing. Right. And I'm like, I'm going to go up to Austin and I'm going to try my job. I'm going to try to work in a 9-to-5 job, something that is not so stressful, where the hours aren't as long. So I had some customers who worked at Applied Materials up in Austin. And so back in 1999, and so within the Asian family, and I say Asian family because this is the only experience I could speak of directly. As I've worked with more families in recovery, it seems to be pretty common in the sense that we just kind of turn our heads away. Parents are like, well, they're just going through a phase, or they rationalize it out or something like that. And so they just kind of like, well, he's just depressed. He's going through a tough time. This is a tough industry. A lot of excuses were made for me. So I went up to Austin and I managed to, find drugs within 48 hours. It just didn't take long. Right? Yeah. So apparently the different place thing didn't work. I didn't know that back then. I know that now, but back then.
Geographic cure is a myth.
Right. It's such a myth. Then I hung up there, helped open a couple restaurants, just kind of coasted through. And then my brother called and said, hey, I'm doing a restaurant over in Midtown. And so I was like, okay, so what do you need from me? He goes, oh man, I just need you to come down for 6 weeks. I need you to create a menu for me and just come down and train my chefs. I'll have everyone ready. And I was up in Austin. It was pretty cush for me. I was away from family, responsibility. I could disappear when I want. I didn't really make any new relationships up there. So it was perfect for someone like me who wants to disappear and
because you're still using.
Yeah, okay. I'm still using, right? And so when my brother asked me that, I was like, oh, I don't really want to do this, but he's my brother, right? So I came back down in 2000 and I helped open the Fish. So when I came down, he had no chefs. He had nothing ready for me. So everything he promised, so it wasn't going to be a quick 6 weeks in and out. I'm now in it with him. And so I stayed there for about a year and a half, managed to stay sober from the hard stuff, but still drank, obviously. I think that's when the Houston Press did a full page write-up on me and basically called me the sushi Nazi. It was an interesting review because the guy who wrote it is Rob Walsh, and I got to talk to him years later, about a couple of years back, actually. And I told him, I said, hey, remember that full page review that you did of me back in 2000? And I think he was bracing himself. And I looked at him, I said, you know what? That's probably one of the most accurate reviews that anyone's ever done on me.
What did he say?
He basically said that, that from a culinary standpoint, that I was good. I was excellent.
You are magical.
I'm supposedly a culinary genius.
But otherwise, you're a dick.
Thank you.
Right.
He called me out and he says, you know what? He can't leave town fast enough is what he said. Because my attitude was so bad. He overheard me chewing out a customer and I kicked someone. I chewed out a server. I went off on everyone all the time. Right. So I'm drinking.
Right. You're not
doing the hard stuff, but I'm angry, so, I'm behaving in a manner that.
You're out of control. I mean, that's not who I know you to be.
And for a while, my industry protected that type of personality. And so we got away with it. It was glorified to a certain degree.
Kind of like a surgeon in the operating room, the way it used to be, right? Yeah. They could throw scalpels at people. Yeah.
Duck around.
Right.
So anyway, we did that. And then we ended up opening Uptown Sushi about a year and a half later. And for this restaurant, I had a very specific desire. We wanted to be the first high-end Japanese restaurant in the city of Houston. By that time, New York, California had already had this type of thing. Houston did not, and I wanted to be the first. And so I had enough ego for like the world. And I'm like, we're going to do this. And we were highly successful. I think for the first 3 years, we had like 3-hour wait lists going on for like 3 solid years. And it was the place to be. I mean, the bar, 5 rows deep. I mean, I don't know what our occupancy was, but it was maxed out. So that didn't help my humility cause. And I didn't know anything about recovery. And I started partying, not get 1 table, but you need 2. Why get 1 bottle when you can get 2? Everything is times 2. And so I modeled this for my managers who worked with me. So I had 5 younger than me, impressionable managers. We're a fairly young group, a bunch of hotshots rolling through the city. We work 15-hour days and we go hit the clubs. I bought each of them a BMW convertible and we all just rolled through town, partying it up. And obviously, when you're drinking, that's when the hard stuff started coming back again, right? So start with Coke, keep yourself awake, drink, go through that whole thing. And the days became a blur. My parents thought that I needed to get married. That's the cure. Answer. That's the cure. They're like, you know what? You're 32 now and you need to settle down. And
we've prepared you a nice list of resumes.
I had met this young lady up in Dallas and we had dated for 2 years and I had been sober for a little while, during that time. So it's just one thing after another. If I'm not filling myself with drugs or alcohol, then it's going to be women, right? We dated 2 years. It was long distance. We got married. And it was probably about the shortest marriage you could ever imagine. So like,
I don't know, Britney Spears might have had you beat.
Did she?
She had like a 24-hour.
Right.
Okay. It wasn't that short, but it was like a month in, I knew it was a mistake. Like a month in, we got into an argument. She disappeared on me. And I'm just like, is this normal that when you get married and you get pissed off at each other that you just kind of disappear? And I'm like, we're not dating anymore, right? Like we're married. We're not supposed to just like disappear when we get pissed off. And anyway, we did like 8 months of church counseling. And, I got into it with my pastor. I got into it with everyone. I'm like, look, this is just not going to work out. So she ended up filing for divorce and she moved back, wrote her a check and said, see ya. It was probably the most expensive 1 year of my life. And that's all that mattered to me at that time. That's why I make that comment, because back then it was just money and whatever. Right. And so losing the relationship was like, whatever, here you go. And it was a horrible, arrogant, insensitive part of me that when I talk about my past, I have to be frank because I have to remember right how much of a jerk I was.
Well, active addiction is not pretty. So yeah, man, your honesty is probably appreciated by a lot of our listeners who, like, Chris Davis says this all the time. He says, I am loyal, I am kind, I'm trustworthy when I'm sober. Right. And when I'm not, I'm none of those things.
Right. Absolutely. And it's you're completely opposite, right? You can just be like neutral or just not those things and something else, but I am literally the opposite, right? I'm not just not loyal. I am really disloyal, right? And so after that, I swore off women. I swore off marriage. Told my parents, stay out of my personal life. This is a horrible idea because this experiment did not go well. And so I blamed everyone, forgetting that I bought the ring and I proposed to her. So that was really sharp on my part. And then my sister comes down from Austin to live with me one summer after my ex-wife leaves. She came down because my parents were concerned. And I think my mom at that time had an idea that I was doing drugs. So my sister came down on the pretense that she needed a place to stay while their home is being built. And it's true, their home was being built, but there are tons of other places she could have stayed, but she stayed with me because I was severely depressed at the time. I was angry at the time. And all I wanted to do was just get a whole bunch of Coke, hook it up. And yes, I prepared my own drugs. So I prided myself in the fact that I prepared my own drugs. I was like, oh, I don't do that street stuff. I cook this myself, like I cook everything else. And that was the way I made myself feel like it's okay. It's okay. This stuff is clean because I'm preparing it myself, right? But anyways, she came down and she caught me cooking drugs in my kitchen one day. You can imagine how that went down. And all I remember is that she walked up to my face and she's like, You effing crackhead. This is my younger sister. And I was just stunned because no one's ever approached me so directly that way. And of course, the indignation. You're in my house. How dare you come to my face and call me a crackhead? Truth hurts. I mean, that's all I can say. The truth hurts. I held on to that resentment. I mean, because it doesn't
that makes sense.
Much, right? Complete sense, right? After that initial rage left, the words kept ringing in my head. I'm a crackhead. And it just didn't sit right with me. I'm a successful chef. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm liked by many. I party all the time. I
drink single malt scotch, damn it.
Yeah. I mean, I have everything the world has to offer except a meaningful sense of belonging, right? And that's when it starts hitting you that, oh, I might be a crackhead.
So did she tell your parents? Was it were there any family interventions or attempts?
No, she told my mom, and then they tried to intervene this one time. And it's funny that you asked that because I went to this hotel right over here by the Galleria and I disappeared for like a week. And then my mom and my sister showed up at the lobby. I don't know how they tracked me down. They're just like, you got to stop doing this. And she's like, you are going to send me to my grave early. And all I could think was, oh, you're making this about you? I mean, I was just...
Right.
That's the kind of place that I was in, right? I'm like, good job, Mom. You want to make this about you? I'm like, you know what? Don't worry about me. I'm fine. And so I'm on the phone. The hotel lobby person cannot by law tell them what room I'm in, but they can connect me and I'm talking to them through the phone. And I said, you know what? I'll see you in 2 days. And so she departs. And I think that there was enough anger to get me through the night. But by the time I woke up the next day, all I was thinking is, what am I doing here? I felt like I kept crossing lines that I told myself I never would. I'll never get a divorce. Guess what? You got a divorce, I would never tee off on my mom. Yeah, I just teed off on my mom, right? Everything started falling apart. And so basically, I eventually got out of the hotel. I went back to my house and I just hung out for a little bit. I said, okay, guys, I'm good. And I was good for a while, for a couple of months. And then once again, I replaced that for a relationship. And so my current wife, there's only been 2. I've been married 11 years now, been together with her for about 15. I met her that summer and I was madly in love and I was able to focus all my attention on her. So instead of having alcohol as my God or gambling as my God or drugs as my God, I went back to
Janet.
Yeah, I went back to Janet. And I started idolizing her and my life started evolving around how things were between us, right? So I wanted to marry her like a month in. I was 34 at the time. She was 24. I went to go see her parents and her parents were like, oh no, this is not going to happen. So I had like the 3 worst things possible going for me, right? I was divorced. I was 10 years older than her. And what really mattered to her parents is that I did not graduate college. The reason being is both her parents are academics. They both have PhDs. Her dad is like the dean of 2 schools in Korea, like the Korean equivalent of MIT that's in Korea. So they are heavy academics. Her mom actually just picked up a second PhD a couple of years ago. But back then it was just like, oh, I was like the loser.
A lot like what your dad probably went through to some degree, a little different.
Yeah, well, no, he wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't divorced and he wasn't 10 years older. He was,
he was just poor.
Right? So, yeah, I had probably all the wealth in the world at that time. And
it didn't matter that you had a killer restaurant.
Yeah.
No.
It didn't matter. They're just like, anyone can do that. It's like, okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Piece of cake.
Yeah. Anyone can do it. So that was really awesome. That didn't go well. And so she went to grad school. She got waitlisted to Harvard. So she ended up at Chicago, University's Booth School, graduate school. So obviously, yes, she is a chip off the old block. Smartest person I know. So while she was up in grad school, it's like 500 dudes and like 10 girls. So automatically insecurity, right? Because.
Well, I'm insecure and that's not even my wife. So I in my head, I'm moving to Chicago. I don't know what you did, but.
So basically, I flew to Chicago 13 weekends straight. I inserted myself and I started partying with her and all her classmates. I partied so often with him, I showed up in the school newspaper not once, not twice, but 3 times during that first year.
It's like the creepy old guy.
Kind of. But, you know, I had no white hairs, or not as much back then. And I just drank a lot and I cursed a lot. And I thought I was funny back then. Just partied up in Chicago for 13 straight weekends. And then we flew to Vegas. That was awesome. Won $40,000 at the tables. And so I took like the whole class out to this club, got a table next to Paris Hilton, and we just partied. And I just threw bills like it was like, Hey, can you walk my girlfriend to the bathroom? Just throwing out C notes like they're dollar bills, right? It was just obnoxious. And I was scared of losing her. So after the 13 weekends, I stopped going up there. I was tired. I was depressed. I was looking at myself and I'm just thinking, wow.
I need some crack.
Pretty much. But I held off. I was like, you know what? You're going to have to be okay with this because this is going to have to go on for 2 years.
Right.
So I talked to her and tried to draw some healthy boundaries, for our relationship on basically try to control what she could and could not do because I'm insecure. That went really well. Not. That was horrible. She was like, oh, no, you know what? We don't see eye to eye on all these things. And we just got into constant arguments. So when I felt like I was losing her a couple weeks later, that's when I went to the crack. And that's when I just went binging. I went off. And I mean like mountains of this stuff I went through. It was like Charlie Sheen style type of stuff. And it was a lot of money and a lot of drugs. And it was amazing that I lived through those 6 months because I went at it really hard.
Was that when you used to put your golf clothes on and you showed up at the restaurant just so that they thought you were playing golf?
Exactly.
And so, and the secret is, so they see him every day in golf clothes. And meanwhile, he's not golfing, but he sucks at golf still. And that's sort of the hard thing to kind of understand. And when you were like holed up you were holed up at home and you didn't go shopping, but you called him for food. And so these are your friends, people that you work with, and they would show up at his house with food and they'd be like, done. And he would tell them to just leave it at the front door. And can you imagine what they're like, dude, I like you. I have food for you. You won't even say hi. Meanwhile, he's like in there in this addiction hell, like close to the bottom.
It was really, really close to the bottom. And you're right. And not only did they drop it. So at a certain point, I wanted to detach myself from the restaurant. And so my brother, I was just telling him, hey, I'm just going through a tough time. I need you to cover for me. So that's a great thing about having your partner as a trusted business person. So him and the managers, everything's good. And I just fell off the grid. And you're right. I would have them leave, food at the door. I knew it was really bad when I ordered from the Chinese restaurant, right around the corner, and I unlocked the front door. And because I was such a regular, I asked them to leave the door in front of the closet, not in front of the door. So the delivery guy came into my house, dropped off the food in front of the closet door, of which I was inside the closet. It was bad. I mean, I did weird things. It was
sorry for that. I did not know. Okay. Oh my God.
Yeah, it was like a whole next level kind of thing. And it was at that point after the closet experience, I sat down and I had my first panic attack and I couldn't breathe. And all I remember is like getting a brown paper bag and putting it to my mouth. And I'm like, okay, Lord, if you help me live through this, and you and I both know that, sure.
Well, yeah, he told me that you kind of reneged on that.
Yeah, that was a huge bust. I'd gotten to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm stuck in this. I'm done. And so I tried to, I guess one would say, kill myself. Like I attempted suicide twice.
How?
I was hoping to overdose and like just pass out.
You just did so much crack.
Yeah, just smoke. Just take the biggest rock I could find, stuff it in there, and just take so much smoke that I would just pass out and fade. The first time I did that, I didn't wake up until 28 hours later. Roughly, right? And when I woke up, I thought it was just like later on in the day. And the only reason I realized was because when I called the restaurant, they told me, oh yeah, it's Friday night. And I'm just like, Friday, that's a day later.
That doesn't make sense. Right?
It didn't make sense. And so that's when I realized that, wow, I really was out for over a 24-hour period, laid out on my couch. And the second time I tried to do it again because I'm thinking, maybe it just, if I didn't do it right the first time, I could surely succeed the second time if I just add
a
this much
bigger
more,
right,
and go. And that second attempt, like halfway through it, I just stopped because like this fear came over me. Like I was like, what if I really die this time? Right? Something just triggered. It was like a self-defense mechanism is the desire to actually live, right? And I don't know where it came from because I was really hell-bent on taking my own life, right? Planned it out and everything was good to go. And then I stopped and then I laid my pipe down and I said, okay, I'm going to get help. So I called my girlfriend at the time and I said, hey, I said a prayer before and I was like, Lord, apparently you haven't been the God of my life because I've made everything else my God. And I'm really scared of losing Janet, but I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway. I'm going to call her and let her know that I have a drug problem and I'm okay with losing her. But if you could just help me get better in the process, that would be great. You just have that kind of conversation with God. So I called her up and I told her, hey, I know we're engaged, because by then we're engaged to get married. And I said, I know we're engaged to get married, but I need to go ahead and just kind of share with you that basically I have a drug problem. And if you wanted to call this whole thing off in 6 months, it was a year. So a year, I wouldn't have a problem. I completely understand, but I'm out of control right now. And I think you're the problem. I think you're making me emotionally unstable. Our arguments aren't helping. And so I'm completely blaming her, projecting everything on her. But, I still want to do the right thing. So just want to let you know, yeah, I have a problem with crack cocaine and amongst a slew of other things. But this is the one I'm on right now. So I figured I'd just go ahead and let you know that this is not, this is what you're getting into. And immediately she flew down, helped me find a rehab, got my parents involved, got my family involved, and she just blew it wide open.
Saved your life.
Pretty much. And so didn't have any money because I'd smoked it all by then, 50, 60,000 at a time will go and make everyone broke. And then you take the money you're supposed to pay taxes with and decide to just kind of use that, right?
Smoke it.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, that's good. Oh, mortgage didn't matter, by the way, that, they'll give you some time. So you just take your mortgage and smoke that too. And so by then, financially, I was a train wreck. During that time, there was another restaurant that had opened up and it was a train wreck from the beginning. And that cost like $1 million and something. And so financially, I was now completely destroyed. And so I had just lost everything at that point. And she was the last thing I was holding on to. But by telling her the truth, I was like, you know what? If you're going to lose it all because you got to go big. She came down. She blew it open. They sent me into recovery. So I remember this place called Pacific Hills out in Dana Point. So they sent me off to California. So I went to California, got off the plane, and the director came to pick me up. And I looked at him and I said, hey, how's this going to go down? And he was like, this is going to go down any way you want it to. But considering that your loved ones just put you on a plane and I'm coming to pick you up and we're about to go to your very first rehab, I want you to know that whatever you need, you will have our full support to get better. But that doesn't guarantee it because you got to want it. And I was like, oh, I want it, man. I need it. I realize I've lost everything. I need this really bad. And you're probably waiting to see, oh, did he relapse a weekend? No, I didn't. But I did go in and I took the AA track over the Christian track. I ended up doing both tracks. So I stayed sober probably about 8 months. And then I came back to Houston, Texas, and everyone thought everything was great up until I relapsed again. So people couldn't understand why someone like me, who has a spiritual background, who desires to get well, why am I having such a hard time? So you don't come into the picture until later. But in 2009, we go a year later, my wife decides to go ahead and marry me. We get married. Horrible first year of marriage. And I lose it and I relapse. Cinco de Mayo, 2009. So they take me to the Harris County Psychiatric Center. And so they put me up at like level 5, 6, like, the padded wall area.
I didn't even think it went up beyond 5.
Yeah, 5. Then it's 5. So it was top level. Yeah.
You were 6.
Penthouse. total penthouse suite. Yeah. So I'm in there. They have me, and the reason they had me locked up was because they found me at my house. I had freaked out. I thought the CIA was watching me from my neighbor's house. I hadn't slept in 11 days straight.
Jeez.
So 11 straight days. And you're a doctor, so I don't have to explain to you, where the body shuts down and what drugs keep you going. And that's kind of when through that whole experience that they thought that there might be a comorbid condition, right? And so that's the first time I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Which, by the way, if you diagnose somebody with it that hadn't slept in 11 days, that has been doing a lot of cocaine,
right?
That's kind of a stab.
Make sense? Right. And so we had to go back and get tested 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, like every quarter I was seeing a doctor. But the medication that they had me on was it was awful, right? That's when you come into the picture. And you were the first doctor who was able to get me on the right set of meds, because I came to you late 2010. And Cinco de Mayo 2010, I was back at the Harris County Psychiatric Center. So needless to say, there's a pattern. Something about Cinco de Mayo and me.
Well, you said you identified with Latinos and everything.
They're my people. So I don't know why, but that second time, they're like, okay, all right, we just need to get you right. So the first time I was in there, they had me like on Risperdal and a whole bunch of other stuff. So you had the antipsychotics, the Seroquel to knock me out and all that stuff. Anyway, it didn't work 2009, 2010, and just things still weren't right. And emotionally, you could tell like when I run manic, I don't sleep. So, I mean, like without drugs, like sober, when I run manic sober, there are just days that you don't sleep well, obviously, or don't sleep at all, most likely for me. And so it was a real tough time period. And when I came to, I think, see you that fall is when you adjusted, took me off the Depakote, and we tweaked some of the other medication that I was on. And it was awesome. It was the first time that I felt emotionally stable, I think, enough to even give recovery a chance. So when you're constantly working on feelings and emotions, and that's what drives you and pushes you to some of the decisions that you make, obviously it can be a train wreck. But starting from that fall is when the medications really started working out for me, and I was able to do recovery. And so July 16th, yesterday,
that's right.
It's 10 years for me.
Happy birthday.
Wow. Yeah, 10 years. Who'd have thunk it, right?
Yeah, and that just goes to show, like if you've got something else going on, we call comorbidity or co-occurring illness, and you don't have one of them treated, then you have neither treated.
Right.
And there's something, you wanted it. You wanted recovery. You're successful. I mean, and any listener who has not eaten at Uptown Sushi, you've got to do it. Not only because this episode is sponsored by Uptown Sushi, although that's not factually correct. There is an amazing roll called the Powers Roll.
The Powers Roll.
Which, it's always mispronounced as Powell.
Yeah, Powell.
But man, just order it. Is it on the official menu?
It's not on the official menu. It is in our POS system.
Perfect.
Because your roll I think got taken out at our last menu change. Don't know why.
I didn't even think it made it in.
It did temporarily.
It did, but it wasn't that popular.
No, it's because of we did the menu change and it got left out with like 5 other rolls.
You don't have to spare my feelings. You're the one who really
No, I like
it. He did great. I know.
Really good.
So Julie, the story.
Tell me about the Powers Roll.
Okay, so he's. I'm meeting there with my family, celebrating something which I like to do. It was my favorite sushi restaurant before I even met him. So we're there eating, and Don's there. And so he comes over and we had designed a roll when I was there before. I went like a week or two before with my son and his friend. And he's like, what do you like? And I see this magician at work. And so he just comes up with this awesome roll. Like I like shrimp tempura, something spicy. He's like doing this jalapeno aioli with whatever, because he and my son are riffing and like, boom. So he makes it. And so he's eating there. The chef of the restaurant is eating there. They bring us the roll, and it was so good. I brought it over to his table. Sure enough, he's like, oh my God, this is phenomenal, and they ordered another one, and it really is really good. I don't know all that's in it. To you?
Shrimp tempura, avocados, cucumbers, jalapenos, and wasabi. We did a wasabi aioli.
Aioli, okay, yeah. But I'm not a good sushi chef, maybe because I'm not well liked and I don't drink single malt scotch. But
or maybe you need a mentor.
That's right.
That's all you need is some guidance. That's it.
Absolutely.
That's it. Yeah. So after I got sober, I spent a year staying at the halfway house up on the north side. I was in the AA recovery program pretty religiously. I did the 90 and 90 kind of thing. And, I finished my 1 year. My sponsor, he sponsored me for a year, walked me through the 12 steps, and he relapsed a couple of weeks later. And so obviously up the lineage, my grand sponsor, my grand sponsor were all concerned. They're like, hey, you okay? I'm like, well, I'm not the one that relapsed, but I'm good. He goes, well, Sometimes when a sponsor relapses, the sponsee will relapse also. And it just emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, there's that effect. And they've seen it before and they were explaining it to me. And I was like, no, I think I'm good. I'm good. And so while I was walking through the program, I was doing this thing called house church. So our house church, we are affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention, but New Life Fellowship is the English-speaking congregation of Soul Baptist Church. And so within our church, we do this thing called house church ministry. And it follows after, the book of Acts, chapter 2. It talks and describes basically what the very first church looked like. And it's subtitled The Fellowship of Believers. And so within our church, you have a congregation of about 600 members, and they're all divided up into different house churches. And within these house churches, each house church has about 6 to 12 members. And once you grow to 12 consistently for about 3 months, you multiply, right? And when you multiply, you have someone who's interning, who is spiritually growing, and then they become new shepherds. So we're part of this couple, Joe and Mia Yu. And Mia is now the children's pastor at our church. Incredibly spiritually mature couple. And my wife and I were part of that house church when I was going through recovery. And they've seen me from beginning to end. They even threw me some Cinco de Mayo celebrations, right? Every year I was sober, Cinco de Mayo, they would throw me a Cinco de Mayo party. It became just kind of a tradition thing. And what that does is basically, I think a lot of churches where you go to church on Sundays and then you disappear for 6 days,
right?
It's really kind of hard to, grow spiritually that way. And so what house church, the format looks like is like for the first hour or so, you have dinner. And then you're eating dinner, you're catching up. Then you do some short praise, short word time. And then the bulk of it is basically sitting down and talking about your week and sharing your lives in a deep way. So we've seen marriage problems, work stress issues, inner family relational issues. All these things come up, and it's really, really good. And that's how my wife and I were able to just really be protected and grow, because, to be sober is not enough, obviously, right? I think that God had far greater plans for us than just to be sober. It's the beginning of life for those of us who are afflicted with alcoholism and addiction issues. And so it was good for us that I was going to meetings and I was understanding what my condition was in recovery. But while this was happening, we were going to house church, and I was being taught and led on what a good, sound marriage looks like, what godly communication looks like, what the good role of a husband is supposed to be, the way God intended marriage to be, what he wants in a relationship and how it should look. And so not only do we learn this, but it was modeled for us from our shepherds, who were more mature Christians who've been walking longer than we have. And so I'm getting both. So I'm understanding my sobriety. I'm understanding all this other stuff outside of sobriety that still pertains to daily life. And so with the combination of two, I was able to just really, I think, grow and then really become better at living life on a level that's more than just staying busy. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen in recovery is that people just get busy. They're sober. They just keep themselves busy.
Like distracted in a way.
But it's more of a distraction. Exactly. And I don't think, thank you. And it's
a human nature phenomenon.
It is.
Right. Yeah.
It is. And so about 4 years ago, my wife and I became shepherds. After 6 years with Joe and Mia, we were given an opportunity where we multiplied, and then we became shepherds. And by then I'd been called just kind of into this lay ministry, and it consumed most of my time. And so I really haven't been going to meetings, maybe like with Randy or some other people that I know, to go celebrate certain birthdays and stuff. But short of that, I was pretty much involved in this ministry with my wife. And that's kind of where we're at. And it's funny enough that we have this in our house church. I think it's really cool that, God's going to use my experiences and he's going to bring people into my house church. Like currently I have 2 people who are going through recovery.
He's a big referral source that you may not recognize, but he does send us a lot of people.
I'm like, oh, I know someone. So
I named your role after.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's been really just a blessing that my wife and I are able to give back, not only in areas of recovery, but in other areas that we've been able to just really grow and mature through. I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we have a wonderful relationship with our children. We know how to communicate effectively with them. We understand what discipline is and what it looks like, how it's done in a loving manner. All these things that we've been able to learn through our house church ministry has really come back and allowed us to pour into others.
And you do it. I would just say that I've noticed that change. And I think the house ministry and you and Janet's role is like a whole nother podcast. And I'm sure people would be interested in it because the idea of how you guys get together and talk meaningfully without sort of, I don't want to say distraction of the rituals, but if you do something once a week in such huge numbers, the intimacy factor is not going to be as present.
Right.
And you're not up there just talking to somebody.
Right.
You're mentoring, you're modeling, you're supporting. Right.
However, day 10, when we looked at the positive intervention for day 10, and Dr. Powers, can you share with our listeners for just a minute the importance of the positive intervention?
Sure. And this comes on the heels of getting some feedback from some of the listeners. So thank you guys for reaching out and sort of asking, well, how do I improve my well-being? This is, positive recovery. How am I supposed to improve my well-being? And, what I say is, I guess I haven't been straightforward enough about it, but happiness is not one of those things that you just do with a giant leap. It's the side effect of doing all the small things day in, day out. It's the positive habits. It's reinforcing positivity when appropriate, engaging with your character strengths, developing supportive relationships, improving meaning and purpose and achievement. And we do have the how to improve your well-being. So that's why we do a positive intervention every day. I'm sorry. You could do it every day, but we cover one of these every week to give you guys kind of like an anchor that if you do at least this, then over time, there should be a noticeable boost to your well-being. Is it going to solve all your problems? Absolutely not. No one thing ever will. So if somebody promises you that, I would be very careful. But in today's positive intervention that has to do with improving relationships, I will say that, there's nothing as robust in the literature on well-being as how happiness is predicated on the depth and breadth of one's relationships. So with that.
So this day 10 positive intervention, we were supposed to make time throughout the course of our day and reach out to 3 or 4 different people that you might know and just kind of tell them that you've been thinking about them and let them know what you're grateful for and what they bring to your life. So were you able to do that?
I was. The person that first came to mind was my sponsor who had relapsed. I called him up. It's been a little while now. We probably talk once a year. I talked to him once earlier this year. And so when I got this, I thought it was a great opportunity for me to call him. So my sponsor is much younger than I am by like 20 years. And so that there was a lot of humility involved on my part when I chose him as a sponsor, because most people think, you're already old, you should pick an older guy, whatever. And I'm like, no, you need to go with this guy. And this guy, he was a work of art. Man, he really made me go into the step, especially the 4th step. So when I went through my harms and, my resentments list, I mean, he wasn't going to let me skate by with like this half page of whatever. He really got into it. So I called him up. He said I could mention his name. So a quick shout out to Kyle Joseph.
Hey, Kyle.
He was the year that he spent with me, he was sober and he did it right. He invested and he poured into me during that year. And I still never fully understood what caused him to relapse a couple weeks later. But during that year that he spent with me, he really invested everything he had into me. Not only him, but his sponsor, my grand sponsor, and one step up from that. And so from a family lineage within the program, I was surrounded by just really good, non-judgmental, loving individuals. So I called him up to say thank you. I think it took him back. And he had told me, he goes, it's funny that you called. I was actually thinking about our family, our AA family. He thought it was incredible that I told him, hey, yesterday was 10 years for me. He was like, you can't tell me there's not a God when he can take a crackhead, excuse the term, the slang, but I just want to give you literally what he said. He goes, when he can take a crackhead and turn him into the man that I know you are today, I know there's a God. He may be 20 years my junior, but he's still my sponsor in my eyes. And for him to say that, it gave me just the warm and fuzzies, I think. And it was an opportunity for me to encourage him. I said, hey, I don't know where you are in your sobriety right now, but I hope that you will continue to press forward. And it was a good conversation. So
yeah, so I did this. Obviously, I'll pick out one of the guys I called who was actually a friend at my intervention, who said something that actually made me go in. He's like, Look, why don't you try it? What's the worst thing that could happen? And that just stuck with me. But so I called him, and the first thing I said was, hey man, thanks for picking up the phone. And just something maybe Don would say. He goes, oh, yeah, I didn't mean to pick up the phone. I thought I hit the wrong number. so Dan Levine, thank you for being in my life. And it felt great. I didn't call 2 other dudes, but I did send out meaningful like texts that were responded to. And it's nice to be able to express yourself and really be kind of transparent and about feelings. And yeah, my friends by this point kind of expect that from me at times. So it's all right. It was a good intervention. I liked it. All right. So yeah, next week, the positive intervention is to exercise your body and mind. First, be mindful of what you put into your body. I could tell you right now, that's going to be the hard part. I am cooking, I'm baking, I'm making s'mores, Rice Krispies. I mean, okay, so I'm gonna do this. I'll have one good day. I have the COVID-50. I don't know about COVID-19, but anyway. So if you must smoke, have one less cigarette today. Drink one less caffeinated beverage today. Eat fewer processed and more whole foods. Eat a variety of darker, green and blue, fruits and vegetables. Make breakfast your largest meal and dinner your smallest. Tonight, journal about how today's positive intervention made you feel. Perhaps you will want to repeat today's choices tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing that.
Yeah.
And I apologize for how I might sound to you all. Thanks so much for being here.
Nope. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Don. And again, go eat at Uptown Sushi and order the Powers Roll. Anyway, see you guys next week. Signing off.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2743. We are here to help.